So I want you to start Atlas by using your laptop. So if you have a laptop, please uh, enter this address on your browser. You need to use Chrome browser. That without it won't work on the what is that Internet Explorer or other browsers. So you need to use Chrome, and you need to enter this ID and password, demo and demo. So if you have a laptop, I want you to enter this website. So how you can see the, you can see the Atlas and you can use the Atlas. So for using Atlas, as I said, I want to focus on the defining chords and how you can do this. So for the chord, you need, there are three kinds of chords. One of that target chord, comparator chord, and outcome chord. And by interception of between these three chords, you can predict, you can estimate the proportion of the disease, and you can compare the risk of the disease, and you can make a predictive model. And chords actually they have three levels. So you can set initial target chord, and then you can set a qualifying target chord, and then you can set you have to set analytic target chord. So there is three steps. So and I will show how you can make the three steps or the three-step inclusion criteria. So we need to before making the chord, we need to define the chord by these questions. So what is the initial event, and what is the inclusion criteria, and what is the course exit criteria? So I want to show how you can set what this means later in the later presentation slides. And I said that there is three steps to define cohorts. So we need to set initial event, we need to set inclusion criteria, and we need to set qualifying inclusion criteria. So as again we have three steps for inclusion criteria, and initial events is very important step because it defines the start or index date. So as I said, cohorts has the person ID and the date. So it's very important to define the index date of the cohort. So index date can be defined only by initial events, and when initial event occurred to those patients is the index date. So it is the web homepage of the web Atlas. There are several options. You can see there are several menus. As I said, we are now focusing on the core definitions, and we need to log in. There are thousands of cohorts. Actually, many users in the world made this. Here, I want to make some metformin user cohort. So you can click the metformin cohort, and you can see the exact same cohorts as I made. So the cohort number is 17 whatever. So there is initial event criteria, and there is additional initial event inclusion criteria, and there is additional qualifying criteria, and there is exit criteria, and there is censoring event criteria. So you don't need to define all of these criteria, but I want to explain what it is. Before it starts, we need to define the concept sets. So what does the metformin, and what is the glyburide, and what is hypoglycemia, and what is diabetes type 2. So we'll skip this part because we don't have enough time, and there is some beautiful video tutorial for this, so you can just see this. But I define metformin like this. So you can see I just found the metformin from the Odyssey vocabulary, and I checked the descendants of the metformin. So by like this, I included 48 hundreds of the medications, including metformin, can be included in these terms. So you can see how different medications with the metformin is in here. Or type 2 diabetes, again I choose to include descendants, and I total of 18 concepts are including for type 2 diabetes. So there are many versions of type 2 diabetes with or without complications or certain conditions, but I can just include all of these by using only one vocabulary. Okay, here I want to make some cohort of who used metformin for their diabetes and without the previous history of the hypoglycemia or previous history of the glyburide usage. So I want to just quickly show how you can make this. So it's a little bit fast, so you cannot follow all of this instruction, but you can just follow. You can see the demo videos after this. So I want to just show how you can do this. I select the criteria of interesting. So there is some, you can define the cohort by using cohort diagnosis or test or drug using or the procedures. So because I want to make the index date when the patient start to use metformin, so I used drug exposure of metformin as the index date or initial event. So this is now I define the index date of cohort, which is the start date of the metformin, and I want to add some inclusion criteria. They should have the diagnosis diagnosed by diabetes mellitus on the day of the medication start or the before the medication start. So I can add some inclusion criteria like this. So these cohorts should use metformin and should have been diagnosed by diabetes mellitus before the medication starts. And I want to add two criteria. One is that they shouldn't have the hypoglycemia before. So with at most 0 occurrence of the hypoglycemia all days before or the day of the cohort index. So by this criteria, I just define the without previous history of the hypoglycemia. And because I want to exclude the patients who use glyburide before metformin using. So for this, I added some drug exposure criteria again, and with at most 0 occurrence of the drug exposure of the glyburide, starting between all days before and 0 days after. And I want to exit the cohort. I want to define the exit criteria by using this cohort exit criteria things. So if I want to the patient exit from the cohort when they stop the medications. So you can set like this. So if he or she continues to use these medications, these remains in the cohort, but they stop to use these medications, they exit. Or they start to use glyburide, they will exit too or censored. So by doing this, GUI system, you can just easily define the cohort. And I want to show the result of that. So in this open platform, they have 1,000 people of SimProof from the SimProof, or 5% patients from SimProof database. And by clicking generate data, generate button, you can generate peoples of these with these criteria, and you can see 100 people was extracted from the SimProof 1K database, and 10,000 people were extracted from the SimProof 5% databases. What is the wonderful is that you can see the reports about according to reports about your generation, and you can see how many people were excluded from the first inclusion criteria and second inclusion criteria. You can see the first inclusion criteria excluded 3% of patients, and second inclusion criteria with a previous glyburide criteria actually excluded 34 patients from the first cohorts who just started metformin for their diabetes. And this automatically generates the features of the cohorts. So you can see the demographics of these patients. It's all automatic generated. So you can see most patients are in their 60s or 70s. And you can see what is the most prevalent disease in this cohort. So definitely the most prevalent disease is diabetes, and then heart disease, pain, or inflammations of any specific organs or arthropathies. So you can see how many people are diagnosed by congestive heart failure before. So 40% of the patients had congestive heart failure. Or you can see which drugs they use. So yeah, all of them using metformin or bioguanide, which is metformin too. And you can see the 41% of people used thyroid preparations. What is that? Thyroid hormones. It's very high prevalence. Sorry for interruption. And Atlas, what Atlas doing is that generate human readable documents for your study. So this documents, it's again automatically generated by the Atlas, and you can see what your codes look like in the documents. So you can see that what I made is that people having drug exposure of metformin with continuous observations, and they should have the diabetes before, and there are two kind of inclusion rules. So you can see by this. And there is a graphical view of your codes, how it looked like. Actually, what this Atlas do is that creating SQL code to extract the codes from your database in the format of CDM. Actually, what I want to ask the question was that how many people suffered from hypoglycemia among the people used metformin? So I have to make hypoglycemia cohort too. It is outcome cohort. So it's very easy to make outcome cohort because you don't need to think about the inclusion criteria in outcome cohort. Only you need to set is the outcome. You don't need to the outcome cohort should be defined by the diabetes or metformin users or the ages, because target you already set these definitions in the target, and outcome cohort will be intercepted within the target cohort. So automatically, the criteria used in the target cohort can be transferred to the outcome cohort. So you don't need to set this again. So only the criteria used here is hypoglycemia. That's all. Then I will see the incidence rates of the hypoglycemia in the metformin users and the glyburide users. In the left menus, you can see the type of the incidence rate here. I made it before because it takes some little time. So here you can see the how many people suffer from hypoglycemia among the patients who used metformin for their diabetes. The rate of the incidence of hypoglycemia is 19 per 1,000 people years. And how many people, you can see how many people suffer from the hypoglycemia among the patients used glyburide. So, incidence was higher in glyburide users. It makes sense because glyburide can result in hypoglycemia, but metformin actually usually does not related with the hypoglycemia. So it's just automatically you can just compare, estimate the incidence of the outcomes from target of your interest.